The chickens had always been honest creatures. They didn't lie about storms coming or pretend affection they didn't feel. So when all 17 of them refused to enter the barn on a Tuesday morning in late March, their bodies pressed against a fence line like they'd hit an invisible wall, Mara knew something had fundamentally changed. She stood in the mud with a bucket of feed growing heavy in her grip, watching them mill and cluck in agitated circles. The old red barn loomed behind her, its weathered boards catching the thin mountain sunlight. It looked the same as it had every morning for the past 3 years since she'd arrived here with nothing but a duffel bag and a restraining order that had finally, mercifully, been honored. The barn was her livelihood. The chickens were her only income. Their eggs sold at the farmer's market 2 towns over every Saturday. Without them laying, without them roosting, she had nothing. "Come on, girls," she coaxed, shaking the bucket. The sound usually brought them running, a flood of feathers and eager beaks. Today they recoiled. Dolly, her oldest hen, a rust-colored bird with crooked beak from some long-ago injury, made a sound Mara had never heard before. Not a cluck or a squawk, but something closer to a whimper, high and distressed. Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story is touching you already, make sure you're subscribed. I've got something extra special saved for tomorrow. Mara set the bucket down and approached the barn slowly. The morning air was crisp with pine resin and the faint metallic tang that came before snow. Her boots squelched through mud still half frozen from the night. She'd been up since before dawn, the way she always was, chopping kindling, hauling water from the well, checking the perimeter of the property for signs of the black bear that had been nosing around last week. The barn door stood slightly ajar, the way she'd left it. Nothing looked disturbed. No broken boards, no muddy paw prints, no scattered feathers that would signal a predator had gotten inside. But the chickens knew. She turned back to study them. They huddled together now, a tight mass of brown and white and speckled feathers, all facing away from a barn. Their usual pecking order had dissolved. Even Henrietta, the bossy leghorn who ruled the flock with an iron beak, pressed herself into the middle of the group, head low. "What is it?" Mara whispered, though she knew they couldn't answer. The question hung in the cold air, unanswered. She looked back at the barn. It was old, built sometime in the 1940s, according to the county records, part of the property she'd inherited when her grandmother passed. Mara had never known her grandmother well. The woman had been estranged from the family for decades, a ghost referenced only in bitter whispers at holiday dinners Mara no longer attended. When the lawyer's letter arrived, informing her that Iris Blackwell had left her sole surviving granddaughter a 40-acre parcel in the Appalachian Highlands, Mara had thought it was a mistake. It wasn't. The land was real. The cabin was barely livable. The barn was sturdy enough. And it was far, far away from the life that had nearly broken her. 3 years she'd lived here. 3 years of learning to split without slicing open her palm, to coax vegetables from the rocky soil, to read weather in the way clouds gathered over the ridge. 3 years of silence that had slowly, painfully begun to feel like healing. The barn had been part of that healing. She repaired the roof her first summer, replaced rotted boards, cleared out decades of accumulated junk. She found old farm tools, rusted hinges, a box of canning jars wrapped in newspaper from 1962. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would make chickens refuse to enter. Until now, Mara forced her feet to move. She crossed the threshold into the barn's dim interior, and immediately the temperature dropped. Not the gentle cool of shade, but a deep, penetrating cold that seemed to rise from the ground itself. Her breath misted in front of her face. The smell hit her next. Not decay exactly, but earth. Old, disturbed earth, mineral-rich and dark, the kind that hadn't seen daylight in a very long time. It was strongest near the back corner where she kept the layer boxes stacked. She moved toward it, heart beginning a slow, heavy thud in her chest. The dirt floor looked different. Even in the low light filtering through gaps in the boards, she could see it. A depression, subtle but unmistakable, as if something beneath the surface had shifted or settled. The ground there was darker than the surrounding packed earth, almost black. Mara crouched, her knees protesting. She was only 41, but mountain life had a way of making joints remember every fall every load of firewood, every hour spent bent over a garden bed. She pressed her palm flat against the dark earth. It was warm. She jerked her hand back, pulse spiking. The ground shouldn't be warm. Not here, not in the shade, not in March with frost still clinging to the morning grass outside. For a long moment, she knelt there, breath coming faster now, that old familiar panic starting to claw its way up her throat. The panic that said run, leave, don't ask questions, don't investigate, don't draw attention. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She left that woman bleeding on a kitchen floor in Ohio, had climbed out of her own grave of fear and restraining orders and court dates that never seemed to end. She'd come to this mountain to disappear, yes, but also to become someone who didn't flinch at every shadow. So instead of running, she went back outside. The chickens watched her emerge, their collective relief visible in the way their bodies loosened slightly. Mara walked past them to the tool shed, an even smaller structure that leaned precariously against an old oak. Inside, she found what she needed, a spade, a pickaxe, and a battery-powered lantern she bought last year when a winter storm had knocked out power for 5 days. When she returned to the barn, the chickens erupted in frantic noise. Dolly threw herself against the fence, wings beating uselessly. The message was clear. Don't go back in there. I have to, Mara said aloud, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. I have to know. The barn swallowed her again. This time, she flicked on the lantern. Harsh white light flooded the space, throwing sharp shadows across the walls. The dark patch of earth looked even more pronounced now, roughly 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. Rectangular. Her grandmother's voice came back to her then, a memory she hadn't known she'd kept. She'd been maybe 7, visiting the old woman once before the family rift became permanent. They'd been sitting on a porch somewhere, watching storm clouds gather. The earth remembers everything, her grandmother had said in her mountain-worn voice. Every footstep, every secret, every body. Everybody. Mara's hands tightened on the spade. She told herself she was being ridiculous. This was probably just where something had been buried decades ago. A dead horse. Farm equipment. Bags of spoiled feed. Nothing sinister. Nothing that mattered. But her hands were shaking as she drove the spade into the dark earth. The ground yielded easily. Too easily, as if it had been disturbed recently despite the barn floor showing no other signs of disturbance. The soil came up black and rich, smelling of minerals and something else, something faintly sweet that made her stomach turn. She dug methodically, creating a pile of earth beside the growing hole. 6 inches down. 1 foot. 18 inches. Her shoulders burned. Sweat gathered at the base of her spine, despite the unnatural cold. At 2 feet, the spade hit something solid. The metallic thunk echoed in the barn stillness. Mara froze, every muscle locked. Outside, the chickens had gone completely silent. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. She set the spade aside and dropped to her knees, brushing away loose soil with her hands. Her fingers found metal, smooth and curved. She cleared more earth, working faster now, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. A box. An old metal strong box, the kind she'd seen in antique stores, with a domed lid and a heavy lock. It was perhaps 2 feet long, a foot wide, coated in rust and dirt, but still intact. The metal was cold against her palms, colder than the surrounding earth, as if it held its own winter inside. Mara sat back on her heels, staring at it. Her mind raced through possibilities. This was her grandmother's property. Whatever was in this box, Iris Blackwell had buried it. Or someone had buried it before her. Or she realized she was crying. The tears came without warning, hot on her cold cheeks, and she didn't fully understand why. Maybe it was a shock. Maybe it was 3 years of grief and exhaustion finally cracking to the careful walls she'd built. Maybe it was a sudden, overwhelming sense that her grandmother, a woman she'd barely known, had left her more than just land. She'd left her a mystery. And mysteries, Mara was learning, demanded to be solved. With trembling hands, she lifted the strong box. It was heavy, 40 or 50 pounds at least, the weight of it substantial and real in her arms. She carried it out of the barn into the pale morning light. The chickens scattered as she emerged, then regrouped at a safe distance, watching with bright, unblinking eyes. Dolly tilted her head, and for just a moment, Mara could have sworn the old hen looked satisfied, as if she'd done her job by refusing to enter, by forcing Mara to investigate. "Thank you," Mara whispered to them. "Thank you for telling me." She carried the box to the cabin, her small, crooked home that had slowly become her sanctuary. Inside, she set it carefully on the kitchen table, then stood staring at it while her heart hammered against her ribs. The lock was rusted shut. She'd need tools to open it, or she could shoot it off with a .22 rifle she kept above the door for coyotes. But something made her hesitate. Some instinct that said not yet, not rushed, not without preparation. Whatever was inside had been buried for a reason. Whatever was inside had waited this long. It could wait a few more minutes while she caught her breath and decided whether she was ready to know. Mara filled the kettle and set on the propane stove. While the water heated, she washed her hands, watching black earth swirl down the drain. Her fingernails were packed with dirt. Her knuckles were scraped. She felt more alive than she had in months. The tea was cheap, store-brand black in paper bags, but she drank it slow and hot, cradling the chipped mug between her palms. Through the window, she could see the chickens venturing cautiously toward the barn again, necks extended, testing the air. Whatever had disturbed them was gone now, or maybe it was waiting, patient, inside the metal box on her table. When the mug was empty, Mara stood. She retrieved a hammer and a flathead screwdriver from the drawer, where she kept her sparse collection of tools. She'd learned to fix things here, to improvise and adapt. She could open a lock. The first blow from the hammer made her flinch. The sound was too loud in the small cabin, violent against the usual quiet of her mornings. The lock held. She struck it again. And again. On the fourth blow, something inside gave with a sharp crack. The shackle loosened. Mara set down the tools. Her hands hovered over the lid. She thought about prayer, though she'd stopped praying years ago, around the time she realized God either didn't listen or didn't care. Still, she found herself whispering, "Grandma Iris, if you're out there, help me understand." Then she opened the box. End of part 1. Word count, 2 150 words. The first thing inside was paper. Layers of it, yellowed and brittle, carefully folded. Beneath the paper, something glinted in the morning light, coming through the window. Metal. And beneath that, fabric, dark and rotted with age. Mara's breath caught. Her fingers trembled as they reached for the top sheet of paper. The paper crackled as Mara unfolded it, threatening to tear at the creases. Her grandmother's handwriting covered the page. The ink faded to brown, but still legible. Slanted, deliberate letters formed words that made Mara's heart stutter. To whoever finds this, if you're reading these words, it means I'm gone and the truth can finally come out. I buried this box in 1968, the same year they told me I was crazy. The same year they tried to take everything from me. The same year I learned that some secrets are too dangerous to speak aloud. So you write them down and you hide them and you pray someone brave enough finds them when the time is right. My name is Iris Blackwell. This is my testimony. This is my proof. And if you're my granddaughter, Mara, and I suspect you are because I left this land to you specifically, then you need to know that everything they told you about me was a lie. Mara's vision blurred. She blinked hard, forcing herself to focus. The letter continued across 3 more pages, her grandmother's hand growing shakier toward the end, as if written in haste or fear. In 1967, I worked as a secretary for Consolidated Mining Corporation. They'd open operations on Widow's Peak, the ridge that overlooks this property. They promised jobs, prosperity, a future for our struggling town. What they brought was poison. I kept the books. I filed the reports. And I saw the numbers that didn't add up. Equipment purchase that never arrived, safety inspections that were never conducted, medical complaints from workers that disappeared from the files. When I asked questions, my supervisor, a man named Howard Kellen, told me to keep my mouth shut if I knew what was good for me. But I couldn't, not after what I saw. Mara's hands were shaking so badly now that the paper rattled. She set it down, pressing her palms flat against the table, trying to steady herself. Outside, a crow called, harsh and insistent. The sound made her jump. She forced herself to keep reading. July 12, 1967. I stayed late at the office to catch up on filing. Everyone else had gone home. I heard voices in the conference room. Howard Kellen and two other men I didn't recognize. They were arguing. I heard one of them say, "The runoff is going straight into the water table. If anyone tests the wells." Howard cut him off. "No one's going to test anything. We paid off the right people. The town council, the county inspector, even the local doctor. Anyone who gets sick, we'll call it flu season. Anyone who complains, we'll call them troublemakers." I should have walked away. I should have pretended I heard nothing. Instead, I listened, and I learned that Consolidated Mining had been dumping arsenic, lead, and mercury into the groundwater for 18 months. They knew. They always knew. And they didn't care because shutting down a fix it would cost more than settling a few wrongful death lawsuits down the line. Mara's throat constricted. She thought of the wells she drew from every day, the water she drank and cooked with. How far did groundwater travel? How long did poison last in soil? I went to the sheriff the next day. He laughed at me, called me a hysterical woman who'd misunderstood a business conversation. I went to the newspaper. The editor was polite but firm. Without proof, he couldn't print accusations against the town's largest employer. So I got proof. I went back to the office late at night. I copied files, invoices, internal memos. I took photographs of the dumping sites with my Brownie camera. I collected water samples from 3 different wells in town and paid for testing at a lab 2 counties over. The results came back exactly as I feared. Contamination levels 20 times the safe limit. I thought I had them. I thought truth and evidence would matter. I was so naive. Mara turned to the next page. Her grandmother's handwriting had deteriorated here. The letters pressed deep into the paper as if written in anger. They came from me on October 3rd, 1967. Howard Kellen, the sheriff, and a doctor I'd never met. They had papers signed by a judge I'd known since childhood. The papers said I was mentally unstable, a danger to myself and others. They said I'd been making wild accusations, harassing upstanding citizens, showing signs of paranoid delusion. They took me to Riverview Psychiatric Hospital. I was there for 8 months. 8 months of being told I'd imagined everything. 8 months of forced medication that made my hands shake and my thoughts slow. 8 months of therapy designed to make me recant. To admit I'd been confused, to apologize for causing trouble. I never did. So they broke me a different way. They told me my husband had left me, that he'd filed for divorce, that he wanted nothing to do with a crazy woman. They told me my daughter, your mother, was better off without me, that she'd been placed with a good family who could provide stability. They told me that if I ever wanted to see her again, I needed to admit I'd been wrong about everything. So I lied. I told them what they wanted to hear. And they released me with a diagnosis of acute delusional disorder on my permanent record. Mara realized she was crying again, tears dripping onto the yellowed paper. She wiped them away carefully, trying not to smudge the ink. By the time I got out, my husband had indeed left. My daughter refused to see me. They'd spent 8 months convincing her that her mother was insane. The mining company had closed its operations on Widow's Peak and moved on to poison some other community. And everyone in town looked at me with pity or suspicion. The poor crazy woman who'd lost her mind. I couldn't fight them anymore. I couldn't prove anything without access to the files I'd copied, and those had disappeared while I was hospitalized. So I did the only thing I could do. I came back to this land, my family's land, and I waited. I waited for the lawsuits to start, for the cancer clusters to emerge, for someone else to notice what I'd noticed. It took 15 years, but eventually they did. By then, I was too old, too broken, too dismissed as that crazy woman to be a credible witness. But I kept records. I kept everything. In this box, you'll find photographs of the dumping sites, copies of internal memos hidden in my bra when they institutionalized me, water testing results, medical records of workers who died mysteriously, a map of the contaminated wells, my journals from that year, and one more thing. Evidence they never knew I had. Mara's hands trembled as she set aside the letter and reached back into the box. Beneath the papers lay a small leather journal, its cover cracked with age. Beneath that, a stack of photographs, their colors faded to ghostly blues and greens. She spread them across the table. The images showed men in work clothes dumping barrels into a creek, trucks with Consolidated Mining painted on their sides parked beside what looked like a waste pit, a field of dead cattle, their bodies bloated and still, and one photograph that made Mara's blood run cold, a child's grave marker, weathered and small, surrounded by a dozen others in what appeared to be a makeshift cemetery. She turned the photo over. On the back, in her grandmother's handwriting, 15 children, all under age 10. All died within 6 months of each other, 1967. Official cause, influenza. Real cause, arsenic poisoning. "Oh, God," Mara whispered. "Oh, Grandma." She forced herself to keep going. Beneath the photographs lay several official-looking documents, their seals and signatures still visible despite the years. A water quality report showing contamination levels. A memo from Howard Kellen instructing staff to lose certain files. Medical records with confidential stamped across them in red ink. And beneath all of that, wrapped in a rotting piece of silk, was a small glass vial filled with dark water. Mara lifted it carefully. A label had been glued to the side, the adhesive long since yellowed. Well water from the Morrison property, September 1967. Tested positive for arsenic, 42 ppm, lead, 89 ppm, mercury, 12 ppm. Keep as evidence. The vial was warm in her palm, just like the earth in the barn had been warm, as if something inside it was still alive, still waiting, still dangerous after all these years. A sharp knock on the door made Mara drop the vial. It rolled across the table, and she lunged for it, catching it just before it fell to the floor. Her heart hammered as she looked toward the door. Through the small window, she could see a figure, a man in a brown jacket and a baseball cap. "Miss Blackwell, you home?" The voice was male, unfamiliar, carrying a friendly tone that made every nerve in Mara's body scream danger. She quickly gathered the documents, shoving them back into the strong box. She closed the lid just as the knock came again, harder this time. "Miss Blackwell, it's Tom Hendricks from Apex Land Development. I sent you a letter last month about a development opportunity. I was in the area and thought I'd stop by to discuss it in person." Apex Land Development. Mara remembered the letter. She'd thrown it away without reading past the first paragraph. Something about purchasing mountain properties for a luxury eco-resort development. She'd seen enough of those developments in other parts of Appalachia. They came in with promises of preserving natural beauty, while clear-cutting forests and building McMansions for rich people from Atlanta and Charlotte. "Just a minute," she called, forcing her voice to sound casual. She shoved the strong box under the table, threw a dish towel over it, and checked a reflection in the small mirror by the door. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying, dirt still smudged on her cheek. She wiped her face with her sleeve and opened the door, just wide enough to show she wasn't interested in inviting him inside. Tom Hendricks was younger than she expected, maybe 35, with an easy smile and expensive-looking hiking boots that had never seen real mud. He held out a hand. "Tom Hendricks, great to finally meet you. Beautiful place you've got here." Mara didn't take his hand. "I'm not interested in selling." His smile didn't falter. Of course. But I think you'll want to hear our offer. We're prepared to pay well above market value for properties in this area. Your 40 acres, plus access to the mineral rights we're talking about. The mineral rights aren't for sale." Something flickered in his eyes, there and gone too quickly to read. "Well, actually, according to county records, you don't own the mineral rights. They were sold separately back in the 1970s to Consolidated Mining Corporation," Mara finished, "which went bankrupt in 1985, which means those rights reverted to the surface property owner, which is me. I had a lawyer check." It was a lie. She'd never had any lawyer check anything, because she'd never had money for lawyers. But the way Tom Hendricks' smile tightened told her she'd hit a nerve. "I see you've done your homework. His tone was still friendly, but cooler now. That's actually one of the complications we're hoping to clear up. There's some legal ambiguity about whether those rights truly reverted, given that Consolidated Mining had a subsidiary company that... I'm not interested, Mara repeated. Thank you for stopping by. She started to close the door. His hand shot out, catching it. Miss Blackwell, I don't think you understand the opportunity here. This area is about to see major development, whether you participate or not. Widow's Peak has been designated for a new resort project. Your property sits right in the access corridor. Now, we can do this the easy way, where you profit handsomely, or... Mara's hand found a rifle that hung just inside the doorframe. She didn't point it at him, just let him see that she touched it. Or, she said quietly. Tom Hendricks raised both hands, stepping back with a laugh that sounded forced. Or we work with the county on eminent domain, which would be unfortunate for everyone. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. I can see you need time to think. I'll leave my card. He pulled a business card from his pocket and held it out. When Mara didn't take it, he set it on the porch railing. You have a good day now, Miss Blackwell. And think about what I said. These opportunities don't come around often. He walked back to his truck, a shiny Ford that looked ridiculous parked next to her ancient, rusted-out Chevy. Before he climbed in, he paused, looking past her toward the barn. Nice setup you got with those chickens. Be a shame if anything happened to them. The words were casual, almost throwaway, but they landed like a threat. Mara's hand tightened on the rifle. Get off my property. Tom Hendricks smiled, tipped an imaginary hat, and drove away, kicking up dust from the dirt road. Mara stood on the porch until the sound of his engine faded completely. Only then did she allow herself to shake. She locked the door, threw the deadbolt, and wedged a chair under the handle for good measure. Old habits from Ohio, from the life she'd left behind. She pulled the strong box back onto the table and stared at it. Tom Hendricks showing up the same day she found her grandmother's evidence wasn't coincidence. It couldn't be. She thought about the letter her grandmother had written. Some secrets are too dangerous to speak aloud. Mara opened the box again and pulled out the stack of documents, laying them across the table. She needed to organize this, to understand what she had. She needed to figure out what to do with it, because now she understood something crucial. Her grandmother hadn't just been silenced for knowing about the contamination. She'd been silenced because she had proof. Proof that could still matter. Proof that could stop whatever Apex Land Development was planning on Widow's Peak. Proof that someone clearly knew about and wanted buried. Her fingers found the small glass vial again. Dark water from 1967. Still carrying its poison. Still evidence. Outside, the chickens had finally ventured back into barn. Through the window, Mara could see Dolly pecking the ground near the entrance, her movements casual and unbothered now. Whatever had frightened them was gone. Or maybe they'd just done their job. Maybe they'd known somehow that the ground needed to be disturbed, that the truth needed to come out. Thank you, Mara whispered again, though she wasn't sure she was thanking the chickens, her grandmother, or whatever force had brought her to this mountain in the first place. She picked up her phone. No signal, as usual. She'd have to drive into town. She'd have to find someone she could trust with this. But who? Her grandmother had tried the sheriff, the newspaper, everyone who should have helped. They'd all failed her or betrayed her. Mara's eyes fell on one of the documents, a water testing report from a lab called Mountain Environmental Services. The address listed was in Asheville, 3 hours away. She Googled them on her phone, praying for even a weak signal. The page loaded in agonizing chunks. Mountain Environmental Services still existed. They'd grown into a larger organization now, focused on environmental justice and contamination litigation. Their website featured success stories. Communities winning settlements against coal companies, families getting clean water after decades of poison. They helped people like her grandmother, people the system had failed. Mara screenshot the contact information before her signal dropped again. She'd drive to Asheville tomorrow. She'd bring the evidence. She'd tell her grandmother's story. But first, she needed to make copies of everything. If Tom Hendricks came back, if anyone came back, she needed to make sure this evidence couldn't be destroyed a second time. She spent the rest of the afternoon carefully photographing every document, every page of her grandmother's journal, every image of dumping sites and dead cattle and children's graves. She uploaded everything to a cloud drive using her phone's spotty signal, wading through endless buffering circles until each file confirmed uploaded. When she finished, the sun was low, casting orange light through the cabin windows. Her chickens had settled into their roosts in the barn, their soft clucking drifting across the yard. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. But Mara knew that safety was illusion. It always had been. She made a simple dinner. Canned soup heated on the propane stove, stale bread toasted over the flame. She wasn't hungry, but she forced herself to eat. She needed strength for what came next. As darkness fell, she sat at the table with her grandmother's journal, reading by lamplight. The entries were sporadic, written in stolen moments between fear and fury. September 14, 1967. Tested the Morrison well again. Results somehow worse than before. I told Martha Morrison to stop using it for drinking water. She said she can't afford to have city water piped out. She has 4 children. What am I supposed to tell her? That her babies are drinking poison, and there's nothing she can do about it? October 1st, 1967. Howard pulled me aside after work. Said I'd been asking too many questions. Said certain people were concerned about my mental state. I told him I'd go to the federal authorities if necessary. He smiled. He actually smiled. He said, "Good luck with that, Iris. No one listens to crazy women." October 2nd, 1967. I'm writing this quickly. I think they're coming for me. I've hidden copies of everything in the one place they'd never think to look, under the barn floor. If anything happens to me, if I disappear or they make me seem crazy, someone will find eventually. Someone will care. Someone has to care. Mara closed the journal, her vision blurring with tears. Her grandmother had been right. Someone had found it, and someone did care. She looked at the strong box, at the evidence that had waited 57 years to see daylight, at the proof that her grandmother hadn't been crazy, hadn't been delusional, hadn't been any of the things they'd called her. She'd been a truth-teller, and they destroyed her life for it. "I won't let them destroy yours," Mara whispered to the memory of a woman she'd barely known. Not this time. A sound outside made her freeze. Footsteps on gravel, slow and deliberate. She grabbed the rifle and moved the window, peering out into the darkness. A figure stood at the edge of her property, just beyond the reach of her porch light, too far to see clearly, but close enough to be watching. Mara's heart hammered. She thought about calling out, demanding they identify themselves. But some instinct kept her silent. After a long moment, the figure turned and melted back into the darkness between the trees. The sound of footsteps faded. Mara stood at the window for another 20 minutes, rifle ready, but no one returned. Eventually, she barricaded the door again, checked the windows, and settled into the chair by the table with the rifle across her lap. She didn't sleep that night. She sat guard over her grandmother's evidence. Oh, the truth that had been buried so long it had warmed the earth with its waiting. And as dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Mara made a decision. She wasn't going to hide anymore. Not from her past in Ohio, not from the development company, not from whatever fight was coming. Her grandmother had fought alone and lost. But Mara didn't have to fight alone. She just had to find the right allies. The drive to Asheville took 4 hours instead of 3, because Mara kept checking her rearview mirror for vehicles that might be following. Twice she pulled off onto side roads, waiting to see if anyone would turn behind her. No one did, but the paranoia, earned through years of looking over her shoulder in Ohio, wouldn't let go. The strong box sat in a canvas bag on the passenger seat, wrapped in towels. She left copies of everything hidden in 3 separate locations on her property, just in case. Under the floorboards in her bedroom, inside a sealed plastic container buried near the well, and in a waterproof bag tucked into the hollow of an old oak tree half a mile up the ridge. If something happened to her, if she disappeared the way her grandmother had tried to warn people she might disappear, the evidence would survive. Mountain Environmental Services occupied the 2nd floor of a restored brick building in downtown Asheville. wedged between a coffee roaster and a bookshop that smelled of old paper and possibility. Mara climbed the narrow stairs, the bag heavy in her arms, and pushed through a door marked with their logo, a mountain range encircling a drop of water. The reception area was small but tidy, walls covered with photographs of communities they'd helped, smiling families holding clean water signs, a creek running clear again after decades of orange acid mine drainage, children playing in a stream that had once been poisoned. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more incredible mountain stories like this one. A young woman with short dark hair looked up from her desk. "Can I help you?" Mara's mouth had gone dry. She'd rehearsed what she'd say a dozen times on drive, but now that she was here, the words felt stuck. I need to speak to someone about water contamination. Old contamination. From the 1960s. The receptionist's expression shifted from polite to genuinely interested. "Okay, do you have documentation?" Mara lifted the bag. 57 years' worth. 30 minutes later, Mara sat across from Dr. Bekichin, the organization's senior environmental scientist, and Marcus Webb, their lead attorney. The contents of the strong box were spread across the conference table between them. Dr. Chin held the glass vial up to the light, her expression unreadable behind professional composure. Marcus was methodically photographing each document with a high-resolution camera. "These water samples," Dr. Chin said carefully, "if they're genuinely from 1967, and if the contamination levels are as high as this report indicates, do you understand what you have here? Evidence that my grandmother was telling the truth," Mara said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Evidence that got her institutionalized and silenced. Marcus looked up from his camera. "Iris Blackwell. I've heard that name before." He pulled out his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. There was a class action lawsuit in the late 80s. Consolidated Mining, multiple plaintiffs from 3 counties claiming groundwater contamination. The suit was settled out of court with a gag order, but there was a footnote in one of the briefs. He turned his laptop around. Mara leaned forward to read the screen. A legal document, dense with terminology she barely understood, but one paragraph was highlighted. Plaintiff attorneys attempted to locate Ms. Iris Blackwell, who allegedly possessed documentation of contamination dating to 1967. Ms. Blackwell declined to participate in litigation, citing concern for her mental health and family relationships. Without her testimony or corroborating evidence, earlier contamination claims were deemed unsubstantiable. "She didn't decline," Mara said, her voice cracking. "She'd been made unemployable, unreliable. They'd taken her credibility. And by then, my mother wouldn't speak to her. The cost of fighting was too high." Dr. Chin set down the vial gently. "Miss Blackwell, I need to be honest with you. This evidence is extraordinary, but it's also decades old. The statute of limitations for most environmental claims." "I'm not here about the past," Mara interrupted. "I mean, I am, but not only that. There's a development company trying to buy up properties on Widow's Peak, the same ridge where Consolidated Mining operated. They're pushing hard, making threats about eminent domain. And yesterday, the day I found this box, one of their representatives showed up at my door asking about mineral rights." Marcus and Dr. Chun exchanged a look. "What's the company's name?" Marcus asked. "Apex Land Development." Marcus's jaw tightened. "We know them. They're a subsidiary of Bridgewater Holdings, which is owned by a shell corporation that, if you dig deep enough, connects back to the same investment group that bought out Consolidated Mining's assets when they went bankrupt." He paused. "They're not developing that land, Miss Blackwell. They're cleaning up evidence." The words landed like a physical blow. Mara gripped the edge of the table. "What?" Dr. Chin leaned forward. "We've been tracking Bridgewater for 3 years. They have a pattern. They identify old industrial sites where contamination was never properly remediated. They acquire the land through subsidiaries. Then they conduct what they call environmental restoration, which is really just removing the most obvious contamination and bearing the evidence of historical wrongdoing. Makes the property developable, eliminates future liability, and ensures no one can ever prove the extent of the original damage. But if I have proof of the original damage, Mara said slowly, proof that predates their acquisition, then you have leverage. Marcus finished. Major leverage. This documentation could reopen the entire case. Force a real cleanup, not just a cosmetic one. Potentially identify other contaminated sites in the region. And most importantly, he tapped a photograph of the children's graves. This could finally get justice for the families who lost people to that poison. Mara's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table. What do I need to do? First, Dr. Chen said, I need to test this water sample. If it's as contaminated as the 1967 report suggests, and if it's been sealed properly, it could still show the original pollutant signature. That's crucial for linking historical contamination to current groundwater issues. Second, Marcus added, I need to file protective orders if Apex knows you have this evidence. And I'm guessing they suspect, given their timing, they might try to tie you up in litigation to prevent you from going public. We need to protect both you and the documents. And third, Dr. Chen said gently, we need to test your well water. If the contamination spread as far as your property, you may have been drinking poison for 3 years. The room tilted slightly. Mara thought about every glass of water she'd drunk from that well, every pot of coffee, every meal cooked with that water. She thought about the chickens, who'd refused to enter the barn where the evidence had been buried. Had they sensed something? Known something she couldn't? Test it, she said. Test everything. Dr. Chen drove Mara back to the mountain in a white SUV loaded with testing equipment. Marcus stayed behind to begin the legal work, but he promised call within 24 hours with preliminary protection strategies. The sun was setting by the time they turned onto Mara's rutted driveway. The chickens had already roosted for the night, their soft sounds drifting from the barn. Everything looked exactly as Mara had left it that morning, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Some invisible line had been crossed. Dr. Chen pulled on waders and gloves. All business now. She took samples from Mara's well first, carefully labeling glass bottles with dates and GPS coordinates. Then she asked Mara to show her the barn. Inside, the hole Mara had dug still gaped in the floor, raw earth exposed. Dr. Chen knelt beside it, pulling out instruments Mara didn't recognize. She took soil samples from multiple depths, tested the ground temperature, measured something she called conductivity. The earth here is warmer than the surrounding soil, Dr. Chen murmured, more to herself than to Mara. That's unusual. Sometimes organic decomposition can generate heat, but this feels different. She looked up. When you dug this up, did you notice any smell? Chemical? Sweet. Sweet, Mara confirmed. Faint, but there. Dr. Chen nodded grimly. That's consistent with certain heavy metal contaminations. Mercury in particular can have a sweet, almost ethereal scent as it off-gasses. She stood, brushing dirt from her knees. I'll need to send these samples to our lab, but preliminarily, I'd say your chickens were right to avoid this base. There's definitely something wrong with this ground. How long until you know for sure? The full analysis will take a week, maybe 2. But I can do a rapid field test on the well water tonight that will tell us if there's immediate danger. Dr. Chen pulled a compact testing kit from her bag, something that looked like a sophisticated chemistry set. It won't be as precise as the lab work, but it'll tell us if you need to stop using that well right now. They sat up on Mara's kitchen table, under the harsh light of her overhead bulb. Dr. Chen worked methodically, adding drops of various reagents to small samples of the well water, watching for color changes, recording observations in a weathered notebook. Mara made coffee, then remembered the water came from the well and poured out untouched. Okay, Dr. Chen said after 20 minutes of careful testing. The good news is your well water doesn't show acute contamination levels. Whatever was dumped on Widow's Peak. The groundwater flow hasn't carried it this far, or it's been sufficiently diluted over time. Relief flooded through Mara. And the bad news? The bad news is there are trace amounts of arsenic and lead, below the EPA's current action levels, but higher than natural background levels for this area. You shouldn't panic, but I'd recommend using bottled water for drinking and cooking until we get the full lab results. And definitely don't give this to your chickens. Mara nodded, processing. Not immediately dangerous, but not clean either. Her grandmother's poison, still lingering in the earth after nearly 6 decades. Dr. Chin packed up her equipment, then paused. Can I ask you something personal? Sure. Why are you doing this? You could take Apex's money, sell the property, walk away from all of it. No one would blame you. Mara looked toward the window, where darkness had settled over the mountain. The chickens were silent now, deep in their roost sleep, safe in a barn that had hidden secrets for 57 years. Because my grandmother couldn't, she said quietly. Because they silenced her, broke her, took everything from her, and she died knowing no one believed her story. I can't bring her back. I can't give her the vindication she deserved, but I can make sure her evidence matters. I can make sure she wasn't wrong to fight. Dr. Chen's expression softened. For what it's worth, I think she chose the right person to leave that land to. After Dr. Chen left, promising to call as soon as the rapid tests on the soil samples were complete, Mara sat alone in her cabin with a bottle of water bought from a gas station on the drive back. The strong box sat on the table, empty now except for her grandmother's journal. All the other documents were in Dr. Chen's possession, being cataloged and preserved as evidence. Mara opened a journal to a random page. Somewhere in the middle, her grandmother's handwriting had steadied here, as if she'd found some reserve of calm in the chaos. November 15th, 1967. They released me today. Cured, they say. I signed papers admitting I'd been delusional. I apologized to Howard Kellen in front of a hospital administrator. I played the part of the grateful, recovered patient. And tonight, I came back to my empty house, and I dug a hole in the barn floor, and I buried the truth where they'll never think to look. I know they won. I know I've lost my husband, my daughter, my reputation, everything that mattered. But I want whoever finds this to know I didn't lose my mind. I didn't imagine it. It was real. The poison was real. The deaths were real. And someday, someone will prove it. I hope that someone is brave. I hope they're braver than I was. I hope they don't stop fighting when it gets hard, because it will get hard. It will get impossible. But truth matters, even when no one wants to hear it. Especially then. Mara closed the journal, tears streaming down her face. I'm trying, Grandma, she whispered. I'm trying to be brave enough. A sound outside made her look up. Footsteps again, multiple sets this time, crunching on gravel. She grabbed the rifle and moved to the window. 3 figures stood at the edge of her property, just beyond the porch light's reach. They weren't trying to hide. They wanted to be seen. One of them stepped forward far enough of the light to catch his face. Tom Hendricks. Mara's heart hammered, but she didn't let herself show fear. She opened the door, rifle held loosely in one hand, and stepped onto the porch. Mr. Hendricks, it's past sundown. You're trespassing. Tom raised his hands in mock surrender, that easy smile back on his face. Just want to check in, see if you've reconsidered our offer. My colleagues and I, he gestured to the 2 figure behind him, we're prepared to increase our bid significantly. $60,000 over market value. Not interested. Miss Blackwell, we know you went to Asheville today. We know you met with Mountain Environmental Services. His smile hardened into something sharp. We also know you have documents that might complicate our development plans. So let me be clear. Those documents are the property of Consolidated Mining, which is now owned by our parent company. You're in possession of stolen corporate records. Mara's grip tightened on the rifle. My grandmother wasn't a thief. She was a witness. Your grandmother was a mentally ill woman who stole confidential files and then fabricated wild claims when she got caught. If you try to use any of that material publicly, we will sue you for defamation, theft of intellectual property, and interference with legitimate business operations. We will tie you up in court for years. We will bankrupt you. Those sound like threats, Mr. Hendricks. Just facts. He took a step closer. Or you could take our very generous offer, sign a non-disclosure agreement, and walk away from this mess with enough money to start fresh anywhere you want. Seems like a smart choice for someone who already ran away once. The reference to her past, to Ohio, to the restraining order, to the life she'd fled, felt like a punch to the gut. They'd investigated her, dug into her history, found her weaknesses. "Get off my land," Mara said, her voice deadly quiet, "and don't come back." Tom Hendricks stared at her for a long moment, that false friendliness finally dropping away completely. What replaced it was cold calculation. "You have 48 hours to reconsider. After that, we move forward with eminent domain proceedings. The county's already approved the project. Your property is in the way of essential infrastructure. You'll get fair market value, which is considerably less than what we're offering now, and you'll get nothing else." He turned and walked back to his truck, the two figures following. Before he climbed in, he called out, "Those are nice chickens, by the way. Would hate for predators to get them." The truck's engine roared to life. They drove away slowly, deliberately, making sure Mara watched them leave. She stood on the porch until the taillights disappeared, then went inside and locked every door and window. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip the phone when she called Marcus Webb's number. He answered on the second ring. "Miss Blackwell? They know. Apex knows I have the documents. They were just here, threatening lawsuits and eminent domain. They said I have 48 hours. Her voice cracked. "Marcus, I don't have money for lawyers. I can't fight a corporation. My grandmother couldn't, and she was stronger than—" "Stop." Marcus's voice was firm but kind. "Listen to me. They're bluffing about the stolen documents claim. Those files were evidence of illegal activity. There's no copyright protection for proof of crimes. The eminent domain threat is more concerning, but it's not a done deal. We can fight it, and you're not alone this time. But tomorrow morning, I'm filing an emergency injunction to halt any development on Widow's Peak, pending environmental review. I'm also filing for protective custody of the historical documents as evidence in a potential civil case. And I'm putting out a press release about the discovery of the documents, because once this is public, it's much harder for them to intimidate you into silence." Mara's breath came easier. "You can do all that. I can and I will. But Mara, you need to understand, this is going to get uglier before it gets better. These people have money and lawyers and political connections. They will come at you hard. Are you sure you want to do this?" Mara thought about her grandmother, institutionalized for 8 months for telling the truth. She thought about 15 children buried in a makeshift cemetery, dead from poisoned water. She thought about the families who'd settled a lawsuit in the 80s with gag order, their stories silenced for a payout that could never compensate for what they'd lost. "I'm sure," she said. "My grandmother fought alone. But I have you and Dr. Chun and evidence she couldn't use because they destroyed her credibility. This time we can win." "Okay," Marcus said. "Then here's what happens next." The story broke 3 days later. Environmental advocate discovers hidden evidence of 1960s contamination, read the headline in the Asheville Citizen-Times. The article featured a photograph of Mara standing in front of her cabin, holding one of the old pictures from her grandmother's files, the image of men dumping barrels into a creek. The reporter, a young woman named Sarah Kim, who specialized in environmental justice stories, had treated the story with the gravity it deserved. She'd interviewed Marcus and Dr. Chun, included excerpts from Iris Blackwell's journal, and most importantly, connected the historical contamination to Apex's current development plans. Questions are now being raised about whether Apex Land Development's proposed eco-resort on Widow's Peak is truly about tourism, or if it's an attempt to remediate and conceal contamination from mining operations that occurred more than 50 years ago. The article read, "If the latter, environmental advocates say, it could set a dangerous precedent for corporations avoiding responsibility for historical pollution." Within hours, the story had been picked up by regional news outlets. By the next day, a television crew from Charlotte showed up at Mara's property, asking for interviews. She granted them, standing in the same spot where Tom Hendricks had threatened her, telling her grandmother's story to a camera that would broadcast it to hundreds of thousands of people. The chickens pecked contentedly in the background of the shot, utterly unbothered by the attention. On the 5th day after the story broke, Mara's phone rang. An unknown number. Miss Blackwell? This is Eleanor Morrison. I saw the story about your grandmother. The name took a moment to register. Then Mara remembered. The water testing report in the strong box had been labeled Morrison Property. Mrs. Morrison? Call me Ellie. The woman's voice was elderly but strong. I wanted you to know your grandmother saved my life. Back in 1967, she came to our house and told my mother to stop using our well water. We thought she was crazy. Everyone did. But my mother was pregnant with me, and she was cautious, so she switched to water from town. My 3 older siblings weren't so lucky. They'd been drinking that well water for years. 2 of them died before they turned 20. Cancer. The 3rd lost a kidney to heavy metal poisoning. Mara's throat tightened. I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry. Be proud. Your grandmother tried to warn us. Most people wouldn't listen, but some did. I'm alive because she had the courage to speak up, even when everyone called her crazy for it. Ellie paused. I called because I want to testify. If there's a hearing, a trial, anything, I want to tell people what she did for us. Thank you, Mara whispered. That would mean everything. After Ellie hung up, the phone rang again. And again. And again. Former residents of the area, now scattered across the state and beyond. Children of workers who died young. Families who'd settled the 80s lawsuit and regretted the gag order ever since. One after another, they called to share their stories, to offer support, to say they believed Iris Blackwell, and they were grateful someone was finally fighting for the truth. By the end of the week, Marcus had collected statements from 43 people willing to testify about the contamination and its impacts. Dr. Chen's preliminary lab results confirmed significant arsenic, lead, and mercury contamination in the soil samples from Mara's barn, evidence that the pollution had spread far beyond the immediate dump sites. And the county, facing mounting public pressure and the threat of federal EPA investigation, quietly withdrew its approval for Apex's development project pending further environmental review. Mara stood on her porch 2 weeks after finding the strong box, watching the sun set over Widow's Peak. The mountain looked the same as it always had, ancient, indifferent, eternal. But something had changed. The truth was out. Her grandmother's evidence mattered. And the fight, while far from over, had finally begun in earnest. A car came up the drive, kicking up dust. Mara tensed, then relaxed when she recognized Dr. Chen's SUV. The scientist climbed out, holding a folder. I thought you'd want to see this in person, Dr. Chen said, mounting the porch steps. She handed Mara the folder. Final lab results on the vial of water from your grandmother's collection. Mara opened it, scanning the technical language. The numbers meant little to her, but the conclusion was clear. Sample shows contamination levels consistent with uncontrolled industrial dumping. Arsenic, 47 ppm. Lead, 92 ppm. Mercury, 15 ppm. All values exceed safe drinking water standards by factors of 20 to 40. Sample integrity confirmed through isotopic analysis. Estimated age, 55 to 60 years. It's real, Mara said softly. It's all real. It was always real, Dr. Chen replied. Your grandmother knew that. Now everyone else knows it too. That night, Mara sat at her kitchen table with her grandmother's journal open to the last entry. The handwriting was shaky here, written perhaps in the final days before Iris died. To whoever finds this, I hope you're stronger than I was. I hope you finish what I started. And I hope you know that truth always matters, even when it takes a lifetime to surface. Especially then. The earth remembers everything. Every secret. Every lie. Every drop of poison poured into its veins. And eventually, the earth gives those secrets back to someone brave enough to receive them. Be brave. Love, Grandma Iris. Mara closed the journal gently, tears streaming down her face. Outside, the chickens were silent in their roosts, the barn finally at peace now that its secrets had been unearthed. I was brave, Grandma, Mara whispered. We did it. We finished it. And somewhere in the mountain soil, in the earth that remembered everything, Mara liked to think that truth settled like a blessing warm and alive and finally free. Epilogue, the new life. 6 months later, the mountain looked different in the morning light. The chickens still greeted dawn with their usual chaos, but now they had company. 3 news vans were parked along the road, their satellite dishes pointed skyward, ready to broadcast the day's proceedings. Mara stood on her porch in clean jeans and the nicest flannel shirt she owned, watching people arrive. Reporters, environmental activists, former residents returning to witness history. And at the center of it all, a podium set up at the base of Widow's Peak, where the EPA administrator was preparing to make an announcement. Marcus Webb stood beside her, shuffling through papers. Nervous? Terrified, Mara admitted, but ready. The settlement had taken months to negotiate. Bridgewater Holdings, facing a federal investigation and a class action lawsuit representing 87 plaintiffs, had finally agreed to terms. A $40 million fund for medical monitoring and treatment of affected families. A complete environmental remediation of Widow's Peak, supervised by independent scientists. And a memorial to the 15 children who died in 1967, to be built on clean land with a plaque that would tell the truth about what had happened. Most importantly, Apex Land Development's permit had been permanently revoked. Widow's Peak would be designated as a protected watershed, and no industrial development would ever be allowed there again. Mara's property, the 40 acres her grandmother left her, would remain untouched. Safe. Home. Miss Blackwell? A television reporter approached, microphone in hand. Can we get a statement from you before the announcement? Mara had given dozens of interviews over the past months, but they still made her uncomfortable. She was mountain people now. Private by nature, suspicious of attention, but she'd learned that silence could be as dangerous as lies. Sure, she said. The camera light clicked on, harsh and bright. The reporter smiled warmly. Miss Blackwell, your grandmother Iris Blackwell tried to expose this contamination in 1967. She was institutionalized, discredited, and silenced. Today, 57 years later, her evidence has led to one of the largest environmental justice settlements in state history. What would you say to her if she were here? Mara's throat tightened. She looked toward the barn, where the chickens pecked contentedly in their yard, then back at the camera. I'd tell her she was right. I'd tell her that being silenced didn't mean she was wrong. And I'd tell her that the truth she fought so hard to protect mattered, not just for the people who were poisoned back then, but for everyone who comes after. She taught me that you don't have to win to be worth fighting. You just have to refuse to be silent. The reporter's eyes glistened. Thank you. And what's next for you? Mara smiled. I'm staying here. This is home. These mountains, this land. It's where my grandmother fought her battle. It's where I'll build my life. And I'm starting a foundation in her name to help other people whose environmental concerns have been dismissed or silenced. Because there are more stories like hers out there. There are more buried truths waiting to be found. At the podium, the EPA administrator began to speak, his words carrying across the valley through speakers. Mara half listened, her attention caught by movement near the barn. Dolly, the old rust-colored hen with the crooked beak, had wandered close to where Mara stood. The chicken looked up at her with one bright eye, tilted her head, and made a soft clucking sound that seemed almost like approval. Thanks, girl, Mara whispered. Couldn't have done it without you. Dr. Chin appeared at her elbow, grinning. The preliminary soil tests on the remediated areas are showing major improvement. Another 2 years of treatment and monitoring, and that watershed will be safe again. Really safe. My grandmother would be happy about that. She'd be proud of you, Dr. Chin corrected. You took her evidence and made sure it couldn't be ignored a second time. That takes courage. Marcus joined them, phone to his ear. He covered the receiver. That was the Times. They want to do a feature story on environmental whistleblowers who were silenced, using your grandmother as a lead. Is that okay with you? Mara thought about it. About her grandmother's face in the one photograph she had of her, stern and weathered and unmistakably strong. About the journal entries written in secret, preserved against impossible odds. About the truth that had waited 57 years in the dark earth of a barn floor. Yes, she said. Tell her story. Tell all of it. The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of a memorial stone at the base of Widow's Peak. 15 names carved into granite. Children who died between March and September of 1967. Beneath their names, an inscription, in memory of those lost to preventable tragedy and in honor of Iris Blackwell, who spoke truth when silence was easier. The earth remembers everything. Mara stood before the stone with the other families, some of them elderly now, others middle-aged children who'd lost siblings too young. They held hands, a chain of shared grief and hard-won justice, and someone began to sing an old hymnal that Mara remembered from her childhood. When the song ended and the crowd began to disperse, an elderly woman approached Mara. She moved slowly, leaning on a cane, but her eyes were sharp and clear. "You don't know me," the woman said, "but I knew your grandmother. We worked together at Consolidated Mining. I was just a file clerk, too scared to say anything when Iris started asking questions. When they took her away, I kept my head down and my mouth shut. I've regretted it every day of my life." Mara took the woman's free hand. She understood. She wrote in her journal about being afraid, about understanding why people couldn't fight with her. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I wanted you to know," she wasn't alone at the end. "I visited her sometimes those last years, brought her groceries, checked on her. She never talked about the contamination anymore, but she told me once that she'd hidden proof. She said someone would find it eventually, someone brave. She was right. Thank you for telling me," Mara whispered. "Thank you for being there when she needed someone." The woman squeezed her hand. "You did what I couldn't. You finished your fight. That matters more than you know." As the sun climbed higher, warming the mountain air, Mara walked back to her cabin. The news vans were packing up, the crowds dispersing. Soon it would be quiet again, just her and the chickens and the endless work of mountain life. But it felt different now. The barn was just a barn again, no longer a keeper's secrets. The earth beneath her feet was just earth, no longer haunted by buried truth. And Widow's Peak, standing massive and ancient against the blue sky, felt like a guardian rather than a threat. Inside the cabin, Mara made coffee, from bottled water, out of habit now, and sat at her kitchen table with her grandmother's journal. She'd read it cover to cover a dozen times, but she kept coming back to it, finding new details, new courage in those hastily written words. A knock at the door startled her. When she opened it, she found a young woman standing on her porch, maybe 25, with a backpack and nervous eyes. "Miss Blackwell, I'm sorry to bother you. I'm Sarah Chun, Dr. Chen's niece. She told me about what you did, and I—" The young woman's voice wavered. "I work at a chemical plant in Louisiana. I've been seeing things that don't seem right. Disposal logs that don't match what I see happening. Workers getting sick. And I don't know what to do. I don't know if I should say anything because I need this job, and they could ruin me, and—" Mara held up a hand gently. "Come inside. I'll make you some tea. And then you're going to tell me everything you've seen." The young woman's eyes widened. "Really? You'll help me?" "That's what the foundation is for," Mara said, gesturing her inside. "My grandmother spent 57 years being dismissed as crazy. I'm not letting that happen to anyone else if I can help it." As Sarah Chin sat at the kitchen table, pulling documents from her backpack, Mara felt something shift inside her chest. Not healing exactly. Some wounds ran too deep for that. But purpose, meaning, the sense that the pain and fear of the past, both her grandmother's and her own, had been forged into something useful. Through the window, she could see the chickens scratching contentedly in their yard. Dolly stood watch at the barn door, her silhouette sharp against the morning light. Still on duty, still protecting. Mara smiled. "From the beginning," she said to Sarah. "Tell me everything. And don't leave anything out, no matter how small it seems." Because she'd learned from her grandmother that the smallest details mattered, that buried truths had a way of surfacing when the earth was ready. And that courage didn't mean being unafraid. It meant fighting anyway, even when the odds seemed impossible. The mountain stood witness as always, ancient and knowing. And in the barn where secrets had once been buried, the chickens roost peacefully, their work finally done. 3 months after the settlement, Mara sat in what used to be her bedroom and was now the makeshift office for the Iris Blackwell Environmental Justice Foundation. Papers covered every surface. Case files from people like Sarah Chun, who'd found the courage to speak up about wrongdoing at their workplaces. Maps marked with potential contamination sites. Letters from families asking for help. The foundation had grown faster than Mara ever anticipated. What started as a promise made in grief had become something real, something necessary. She'd hired 2 part-time staff members, both women who'd lost family to environmental contamination, both hungry for justice the way Mara understood hunger. But tonight, she sat alone with a letter that had arrived that morning, postmarked from a women's prison in Tennessee. The handwriting was shaky, the paper cheap. Dear Miss Blackwell, my name is Rita Kellen. You don't know me, but you knew my father, Howard Kellen, the man who had your grandmother institutionalized, the man who silenced her to protect Consolidated Mining. I'm writing because I'm dying. Liver cancer, stage 4. The doctors say I have maybe 3 months, and I can't die carrying his secrets anymore. Mara's hands trembled as she continued reading. I was 8 years old in 1967. I remember my father coming home late those nights, angry and scared in a way I'd never seen. I remember him burning papers in our fireplace, telling my mother they had to take care of the Blackwell problem. I remember my mother crying, saying she's just a woman trying to do the right thing, and my father screaming that the right thing would cost him everything. Years later, when I was older, I found a box in our attic. My father had kept copies of everything. The real contamination reports, the payoff ledgers showing which officials received bribes, internal memos discussing how to discredit your grandmother. He kept it all, I think, as insurance, in case the company ever tried to make him the scapegoat. When he died in 1995, I should have turned it over, but I was afraid of what it would mean for my family name, for my mother, for me. So I kept it hidden, and I've carried that cowardice ever since. Miss Blackwell, I'm in prison because I killed someone while driving drunk. I deserve to be here. But before I die, I want to do one thing right. I want to give you what my father kept. It's more than what your grandmother had. It's everything. I've arranged for my lawyer to deliver the box to you. It should arrive within a week. Use it. Finish what your grandmother started. And please, if you can find it in your heart, forgive a coward who took too long to be brave. Sincerely, Rita Kellen. Mara read the letter 3 times, then called Marcus Webb. She's telling the truth, Marcus said after a long pause. I just looked her up. Rita Kellen, 56, serving 8 years for vehicular manslaughter. Model prisoner. Terminal illness confirmed. And her father, Howard Kellen, was indeed Iris Blackwell's supervisor at Consolidated Mining. He died of a heart attack in 1995. She says he kept everything, Mara said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus, if there are records showing systematic bribery of officials, then we're not just talking about environmental contamination anymore. We're talking about conspiracy, corruption, potentially criminal charges against people still alive. Marcus exhaled slowly. Mara, this could blow open cases across multiple states. Consolidated Mining operated in 6 different locations. If they use the same playbook everywhere, how many other Iris Blackwells are out there? Mara finished. How many other people were silenced? We're going to find out. The box arrived 6 days later, delivered by a weary-looking lawyer who made Mara sign a dozen forms before handing it over. It was larger than her grandmother's strong box, a banker's box stuffed with file folders, photographs, and what looked like ledgers. Mara waited until Dr. Chun and Marcus could drive up from Asheville before opening it. The 3 of them sat around her kitchen table, the same table where her grandmother's evidence had first been revealed, and began sorting through Howard Kellen's archive of guilt. The first folder contained the smoking gun, a memo dated September 1967, from Consolidated Mining's regional director to Howard Kellen. Blackwell problem. Howard, Iris Blackwell's continued investigation threatens our operations and financial stability of all parties involved. Her documentation, if made public, could result in federal intervention and the shutdown of not just the Widow's Peak site, but all of our Appalachian operations. I've arranged for Dr. Raymond Foster at Riverview Psychiatric Hospital to receive her. Dr. Foster has been cooperative with corporate interests in the past and understands the need for discretion. A psychiatric commitment will accomplish two goals. One, removal of Mrs. Blackwell from circulation during the critical period, and two, permanent damage to her credibility should she attempt to speak publicly after release. Sheriff Thomas has agreed to facilitate the commitment in exchange for the usual considerations. Judge Morrison will sign the necessary papers. He's concerned about the impact on local employment if we're forced to shut down. Proceed as discussed. Make sure she has no opportunity to hide or distribute her evidence before commitment. Dr. Chin set the memo down carefully, as if it might burn her fingers. This is a conspiracy, a documented conspiracy involving law enforcement, the medical establishment, and the judiciary. Are any of these people still alive? Mara asked. Marcus was already typing on his laptop. Dr. Foster died in 2003. Sheriff Thomas in 2008. Judge Morrison. He paused. Judge Morrison is alive. He's 91, living in a care facility in Knoxville, and he has a son, Robert Morrison, who's currently a state senator. The implications hung heavy in the air. Keep going, Mara said. What else is in here? The ledgers were damning in their meticulousness. Howard Kellen had kept detailed records of every bribe paid, every official bought, every cover-up facilitated, payments to county inspectors who filed false reports, contributions to political campaigns in exchange for favorable zoning decisions, medical bills paid for workers who agreed not to file complaints about their illnesses. One ledger page made Mara's stomach turn. September 18, 1967, Dr. Raymond Foster, consultation fee for Blackwell commitment. $5,000 September 19, 1967, Sheriff Thomas, special considerations. $2,500 September 20th, 1967, Judge Morrison, campaign contribution. $10,000. Her grandmother's freedom, her reputation, her entire life had been sold for $17,500. There's more, Dr. Chin said quietly, holding up a folder. Medical records, not just from Widow's Peak, but from 5 other consolidated mining sites. They tracked the illness patterns, Mara. They knew exactly what they were doing. The record showed cancer rates among workers and their families that were 3 to 7 times higher than regional averages. Miscarriage rates double the normal statistics. Children born with developmental disabilities linked to heavy metal exposure. All carefully documented, all deliberately hidden. Why would he keep this? Mara asked, why would Howard Kellen create evidence of his own crimes? Insurance, Marcus said. If the company ever tried to make him a fall guy, he could threaten to release all of this. It's the classic conspirator's dilemma. Keep evidence to protect yourself, but in doing so, create the weapon that could destroy you. Among the photographs, Mara found images that made her throat close up. Her grandmother, younger than Mara had ever seen her, standing outside a consolidated mining office in a neat secretary's dress, smiling. Another photo showed her what looked like a company picnic, holding a small child, Mara's mother, maybe 3 years old, and then, tucked into a manila envelope marked personal, a photograph that changed everything. It showed her grandmother standing with another woman outside a small house. Both women were holding babies. On the back, someone had written, Iris and Martha Morrison with daughters, 1965. Morrison, Mara breathed. Judge Morrison's wife. Dr. Chin was already pulling up information on her phone. Martha Morrison died in 1969. Cause of death listed as complications from pneumonia. But the water, Mara said, remembering her grandmother's journal. Grandma wrote about testing the Morrison well. She told Martha Morrison to stop using it. And Martha did, a voice said from the doorway. Mara spun around. An elderly woman stood on her porch, leaning heavily on a walker. The same woman who'd approached her at the memorial dedication. But now Mara saw the resemblance, something that set her jaw, the way she held her shoulders despite her frail frame. Ellie Morrison, the woman said, I told you my mother switched to town water after your grandmother warned her. I told you my siblings died young. What I didn't tell you was that my father was a judge who signed your grandmother's commitment papers. Mara's mind reeled. You're Judge Morrison's daughter. I am. And I'm here because I saw the news about Rita Kellen's box being delivered. I knew it was time to tell you the rest. Ellie moved slowly into the cabin, and Marcus quickly stood to offer her his chair. She settled with a grateful nod. My mother knew what my father had done, Ellie continued. She knew he'd been bribed to commit an innocent woman. It ate at her. She started drinking, stopped eating. The pneumonia that killed her. She was already weak from guilt and grief. On her deathbed, she made me promise something. She said, if anyone ever tries to tell Iris Blackwell's story, you help them. You tell them everything. Everything. Mara asked carefully. Ellie reached into her bag and pulled out a worn leather journal. My mother kept a diary. In it, she documented every conversation she overheard, every suspicious payment my father received, every time he came home drunk and guilty. She was gathering evidence, I think planning to go to federal authorities. But she died before she could act on it. She placed the diary on the table. I've kept this for 56 years, waiting for someone brave enough to use it. You're that person, Mara. You're the one who can finally make this right. Marcus reached for the diary with shaking hands. Mrs. Morrison, do you understand what this means? Your father could be implicated in a criminal conspiracy. His legacy is corruption and cowardice, Ellie said sharply. I love my father, but I won't protect what he did. Not anymore. Not when I've watched good people suffer, because men like him chose money over morality. She looked at Mara. Your grandmother tried to save my life and the lives of my siblings. My father helped destroy her for it. I owe her this truth. The new evidence changed everything. Within a week, Marcus had filed supplemental motions in federal court, presenting Howard Kellen's records and Martha Morrison's diary. The case that had been about environmental contamination suddenly became about systemic corruption spanning decades. The media attention intensified. National outlets picked up the story. Conspiracy of silence. How one woman's evidence exposes decades of corporate and government collusion ran as a headline in the Washington Post. CNN sent a documentary crew. A producer from Netflix reached out about a limited series. But the real impact happened in places Mara never expected. A former worker from Consolidated Mining's West Virginia site contacted the foundation. He'd been keeping his own records of contamination, afraid to come forward because of what had happened to Iris Blackwell. Now, seeing justice finally being pursued, he was ready to talk. Then another call came, and another. Workers from Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Virginia, Tennessee, all sites where Consolidated Mining had operated, all places where people had been silenced by fear or bribed into silence or discredited as troublemakers. The pattern was always the same. Contaminate, cover up, silence, and move on. We're looking at potentially hundreds of victims, Dr. Chin said during a foundation meeting. Maybe thousands when you account for generational exposure. This is bigger than any of us imagined. Mara stared at the map on her wall, now covered with pins marking contamination sites, each one representing families who'd suffered the same way her grandmother had, the weight of it pressed down on her shoulders. How do we help all of them? She asked quietly. We're 3 people in a foundation that runs on donations. How do we fight corporations that can outspend us 100 to 1? We don't have to fight them all, Marcus said. We just have to fight one. Successfully, publicly, set a precedent that other victims can use. Change the legal landscape so that future Iris Blackwells have protections we're creating now. We're building something, Dr. Chen added, not just for your grandmother, but for everyone who comes after. Every case we take, every person we help speak up, it creates a trail, makes it easier for the next person. Eventually, the silence becomes impossible to maintain. That night, Mara stood on her porch watching the sun set over Widow's Peak. The remediation work continued there. Trucks hauling away contaminated soil, workers in hazmat suits carefully treating the groundwater. It would take years to fully heal that land, but the healing had begun. Her chickens were settling into their roosts. Dolly, now ancient and moving slowly, still insisted on being the last one to bed down, still watching over her flock with fierce devotion. "You started something," Mara whispered to the mountain, to her grandmother's spirit, to the truth that had lived in the earth for so long. "We're going to finish it." 6 weeks after Rita Kellen's box arrived, Mara received another letter from the prison. This one was from the warden. "Dear Miss Blackwell, I regret to inform you that Rita Kellen passed away on November 3rd. In her final days, she asked me to convey a message to you. She said, 'Tell Mara Blackwell that courage doesn't expire. It's never too late to do the right thing.' She also wanted you to know that she died at peace, believing that her father's records would help undo the harm he caused. In her will, she left a small sum to your foundation, $8,000, everything she had saved from her prison wages over the years. I've seen many inmates in my career. Very few faced death with the kind of calm Rita showed. I believe your work gave her that peace. Respectfully, Warden Sarah Oakes." Mara sat with the letter for a long time, tears streaming down her face. She thought about Rita Kellen, 8 years old, and watching her father burn papers, carrying the weight of his sins for decades. Finally, in the shadow of death, finding the courage to speak. "It's never too late," Mara said aloud, testing the words. They felt true, in a way that settled something in her chest. She added Rita's name to a growing list she kept in her grandmother's journal. People who'd found their courage, however late, however small. People who'd chosen truth when silence would have been easier. The list was getting longer. 4 months after the settlement, state investigators arrested Robert Morrison, the state senator and Judge Morrison's son. The charges: conspiracy to obstruct justice, tampering with government records, and fraud. Evidence showed that Robert had been quietly buying up contaminated properties across Appalachia through shell corporations, then reselling them without disclosing contamination. The same scheme Apex had attempted on Widow's Peak. His father, 91 and suffering from dementia, was deemed unfit to stand trial. But the stain on the family legacy was permanent and deserved. Ellie Morrison released a public statement. "My father and brother chose corruption over conscience. I choose truth. I stand with Iris Blackwell's granddaughter and all victims of environmental injustice. Some legacies deserve to be destroyed." The statement went viral. Within days, 3 more families came forward with their own stories of being silenced by corrupt officials. Marcus filed lawsuits on behalf of all of them. On a cold morning in January, nearly a year after Mara had found the strong box, she stood at the cemetery where her grandmother was buried. The grave had been neglected for years. Mara's mother had never visited, too damaged by what she'd been told about her crazy mother to face the truth. But now, the gravestone had been cleaned. Fresh flowers covered the ground, and a new marker had been added, funded by donations from families the foundation had helped. Iris Blackwell, 1932 to 2014, environmental advocate, truth teller vindicated. "I brought someone to meet you," Mara said softly. She turned to the woman standing behind her. Mara's mother, Catherine, looked older than her 63 years, worn by regret and missed chances. She called Mara 3 months ago, after seeing the documentary. She cried for hours, telling Mara about the mother she barely remembered, the mother she'd been taught to be ashamed of. "I was wrong," Catherine whispered now, kneeling by the grave. "Mom, I was so wrong. I believed them when they said you were sick. I turned away when you needed me. I'm so sorry." Mara placed a hand on her mother's shoulder. She understood. She wrote about it in her journal. She knew you were just a child, that you'd been manipulated. She never blamed you. "But I blamed her." Catherine's voice broke. "I spent my whole life ashamed of her, when I should have been ashamed of myself." "Then make it right now," Mara said gently. "Help me with the foundation. Tell your story. How they turned a daughter against her mother, how that kind of manipulation is part of how they silence people. Help other families stay together when corporations try to break them apart." Catherine looked up, tears streaming down her face. "I can do that." "You can?" We need you. They stood together at the grave. 3 generations of Blackwell women connected by truth that had survived decades of attempts to bury it. Mara felt her grandmother's presence then, not as a ghost, but as a blessing, a passing of torch from one fighter to the next. Spring came to Mountain with its usual explosion of green. The chickens thrived in the warming weather, and Mara had expanded their coop to accommodate the chicks Dolly had hatched. 11 tiny balls of fluff that followed the old hen everywhere, learning from her watchfulness, her careful protection. The foundation had grown too. They'd moved into a real office in Asheville, hired a full-time staff of 7, and were handling cases in 4 states. Marcus had joined as their legal director. Dr. Chen split her time between research and expert testimony. And Catherine, Mara's mother, managed the intake process, listening to people's stories with the fierce attention of someone making up for lost time. But Mara still lived on the mountain, still hauled water and chopped wood and watched the sun rise over Widow's Peak. The land was in her bones now, the same way it had been in her grandmother's bones. On a morning in May, she received a package from the Smithsonian. Inside was a letter explaining that her grandmother's strongbox, the documents it contained, and Rita Kellen's archive were being added to their American Environmental Justice collection. They would be preserved for future generations, available to researchers, students, anyone who wanted to understand how ordinary people fought extraordinary corruption. Your grandmother's evidence will teach history now, the curator wrote. It will inspire future advocates. It will stand as proof that truth matters, even when speaking it costs everything. Mara carried the letter to the barn, to the spot where she dug up the strongbox that had changed everything. The hole had been filled in, the earth settled, but she could still see where it had been, a slightly darker patch of soil, warmer than the surrounding ground. "You did it, Grandma," she said. "Your evidence matters. Your life mattered. And I promise you I'll keep fighting, for as long as it takes." The chickens clucked softly around her feet, pecking at the ground, unbothered by her emotions. Dolly stood nearby, watching with her bright, knowing eyes. "Thank you," Mara told the old hen, "for refusing to go in that day, for making me look. You knew, didn't you? Somehow you knew." Dolly tilted her head, made a soft sound, and returned to scratching at the earth. Just a chicken doing what chickens do. Or maybe something more, a messenger, a guardian, a small creature that understood truths humans try to ignore. Mara smiled and returned to the cabin. There was work to do, cases to review, people to help, a foundation to run, and a legacy to honor. But first, she made coffee from clean water, opened her grandmother's journal to a random page, and read the words that had become her daily meditation. Truth always matters, especially when it takes a lifetime to surface. Especially then. Outside, the mountain stood witness, as it always had, ancient and knowing. The earth that remembered everything had given up its secrets, and in doing so, had given Mara something she'd never had before: purpose, peace, and the understanding that some fights are worth fighting even when victory seems impossible. Because sometimes you don't fight to win, you fight, so that 57 years later, someone else can finish what you started. You fight to leave a trail for the next brave person to follow. You fight because silence is what they want, and your voice, however small, however silenced, however long buried, is the weapon they fear most. Mara closed the journal and got back to work. The mountain had many more secrets, and she had all the time in the world to help them surface. Complete end of script. Word count for part 4. For 100 words final total word count. 850 words. Your complete 4-part Mountain Woman underdog mystery script is now finished. This extended version deepens the legacy, brings additional emotional layers. Rita Kellen's redemption, Ellie Morrison's courage, Catherine's reconciliation, expands of vindication, and shows the long-term impact of Mara's fight. The story now truly spans from isolation through discovery and vindication to lasting transformation and legacy building. Add epilogue. Make IT 40 200 words. December 24th. Epilogue. 5 years later. The documentary won the Academy Award. Mara watched from her cabin via a live stream on her laptop. The signal cutting in and out is mountain. Weather interfered with her internet connection. When the director, A young woman named Priya Mehta who'd spent 8 months interviewing everyone connected to the case, took the stage in her glittering gown and thanked Iris Blackwell, whose courage echoes across generations. Mara had to set down her coffee mug because her hands were shaking too badly to hold it. The chickens didn't care about Academy Awards. They scratched and pecked in their yard, oblivious of the fact that their barn had become famous, that tourists sometimes drove up the mountain hoping to see the place where the truth was buried. Mara had put up a gate and a no trespassing sign after the third carload of documentary fans showed up unannounced. She wasn't interested in being a celebrity. She was interested in work. 5 years after finding her grandmother's strongbox, the Iris Blackwell Environmental Justice Foundation had expanded beyond anything Mara had imagined. They now operated in 12 states, employed 43 people, and had helped secure settlements totaling over $300 million for contaminated communities. But more importantly, more meaningfully, they'd changed the conversation. Whistleblowers who came forward about environmental crimes were no longer automatically dismissed as troublemakers or mentally unstable. New federal protections have been enacted, laws that bore her grandmother's name. The Iris Blackwell Whistleblower Protection Act made it illegal to institutionalize or medically discredit someone reporting environmental contamination without independent psychiatric review. It was too late to save her grandmother, but it would save others. Mara's phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "We did it. Judge just ruled in favor of the Kentucky plaintiffs. Full remediation ordered. $47 million settlement." She texted back a single word. Grandma. Because every victory felt like it belonged to Iris Blackwell, the woman who'd fought first and lost everything so that others wouldn't have to. Outside, a car was coming up the drive. Mara recognized the engine sound. Her mother's ancient Subaru, held together by hope and duct tape. Catherine visited every Sunday now, had been doing so for 4 years. They'd rebuilt their relationship slowly, carefully, like two people learning a language neither had been taught. Mara stepped onto the porch as Catherine emerged from the car, carrying grocery bags. At 68 now, her mother moved with the deliberate care of someone whose body was reminding her of its limits. But her eyes were clearer than Mara had ever seen them, free of the fog of regret that clouded them for so long. "I brought supplies," Catherine called, "and bread from that bakery you like. And before you argue, I'm staying for dinner." I wasn't going to argue. Good, because I have news. Catherine climbed the porch steps, slightly breathless. She set down the bags and pulled out her phone. "Look at this. Email came through this morning." Mara took the phone and read, "Dear Mrs. Brennan, my name is Thomas Kellen, Jr. I am the grandson of Howard Kellen, the man who helped institutionalize your mother, Iris Blackwell. I was born in 1989, for years before my grandfather died. I never knew him, and until recently, I didn't know the full extent of what he'd done. I'm writing because I've inherited his house, which my family kept but never lived in after his death. While clearing it out, I found something hidden in the attic, another box of documents, more evidence, records that I believe could help ongoing cases your foundation is working on. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness on behalf of a man I never knew, but I want to do what my Aunt Rita did. I want to give you what should have been given decades ago. The truth, all of it. I'll understand if you don't want to hear from me, but if you're willing, I'd like to bring these documents to you. No conditions, no publicity, just a grandson trying to undo what his grandfather broke. Respectfully, Thomas Kellen, Jr. Mara read it twice, then looked at her mother. "What do you think?" Catherine's expression was complicated, pain and hope warring across her weathered face. "I think secrets keep finding their way to the surface. I think your grandmother must be orchestrating this from wherever she is." She paused. "And I think we should meet him. Hear what he has to say." "You're sure?" "Facing someone with that name." "I've faced worse," Catherine said firmly. "I've faced a mirror every morning for 68 years, knowing I abandoned my mother when she needed me most. Meeting Howard Kellen's grandson will be easy by comparison." They stood together on the porch, mother and daughter, survivors of different generations of the same war against truth. The mountain stretched before them, eternally patient, eternally watching. I'll set up a meeting, Mara said, through Marcus at the foundation office. Neutral ground. Catherine nodded, then changed the subject with the abruptness of someone who'd learned that dwelling on pain helped no one. Now, are you going to help me carry in these groceries, or do I have to do everything myself? Mara smiled and grabbed the bags. Thomas Kellen Jr. was 36, a high school history teacher from Charlotte, with kind eyes and the nervous energy of someone who'd rehearsed what to say 100 times and knew it still wouldn't be enough. He sat across from Mara, Catherine, and Marcus in the Foundation's conference room, the same room where so many other stories had been told, so many other truths had surfaced. The box he'd brought sat on the table between them, unopened. I didn't know, he said for the third time. Growing up, we were told my grandfather was a businessman, that he'd worked in mining operations but retired early due to health issues. No one talked about the specifics. And my father, his voice cracked. My father drank himself to death when I was 12. I think he knew. I think he carried the weight of what his father had done, and it destroyed him. What made you look in the attic? Mara asked gently. The documentary. I watched it with my students. We were covering environmental justice movements. When Howard Kellen's name appeared on screen, identified as one of the key conspirators, he swallowed hard. I thought there must be some mistake. So I started researching. Found newspaper articles from the 80s. Found my Aunt Rita's testimony. Found the memo where my grandfather explicitly outlined how to silence your grandmother through institutionalization. He looked at Catherine. Mrs. Brennan, I am so deeply sorry for what my grandfather did to your mother. No apology can undo that harm, but I need you to know, if I'd known while he was alive, I would have confronted him. I would have demanded he confess. Catherine's hands were folded tightly in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was steady but carried decades of pain. Your grandfather didn't just hurt my mother. He separated us. He poisoned my view of her for most of my life. He made me ashamed of a woman who was braver than I'll ever be. She paused, tears gathering in her eyes. But you're not him. You're someone trying to make amends for sins you didn't commit. That takes its own kind of courage. Thomas's eyes reddened. He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Marcus cleared his throat gently. What's in the box, Mr. Kellen? Thomas pulled himself together. More the same pattern, but from earlier. My grandfather kept meticulous records from 1963 to 1970, covering all Consolidated Mining's Appalachian operations. This box contains evidence of contamination at sites that were never part of the 80s lawsuit, places where people got sick and died, but no one ever connected it to mining operations because the company shut down and moved on before patterns could be established. He opened the box and began pulling out folders. Maps showing dump sites that were never officially recorded. Medical records of workers from Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky. Correspondence between my grandfather and other regional managers about how to handle problem employees who asked questions. And this. He lifted out a leather-bound book. My grandfather's personal journal from those years. He wrote in it every night, documenting everything. I think he was terrified of being made a scapegoat. So he created an insurance policy, a complete record that implicated everyone above him as much as it implicated him. Marcus reached for the journal with the careful reverence of someone handling a sacred text. He opened it to a random page and read aloud. June 3rd, 1965. Conference call with regional directors. Corporate has decided that remediation costs exceed projected profits by factor 12. Directive came down. Handle locally. We all know what that means. Pay off who needs paying. Silence who needs silencing. Keep production running. I asked about long-term health impacts. Was told that's a problem for future management. We'll be retired by then, Thompson said. Let them deal with the consequences. Everyone laughed. I laughed with them. God forgive me. The room fell silent. Mara stared at the journal, at the careful handwriting that documented conscious, deliberate evil. This was different from the other evidence. This wasn't just proof of wrongdoing. It was proof that they knew. They understood exactly what they were doing, and they chose profit anyway. How many sites? Dr. Chen asked quietly. She joined the meeting when she heard about the new evidence. 14, Thomas said. 14 operations across 5 states where my grandfather documented contamination that was never remediated, never reported, never addressed. Some of those communities still don't know their water might be poisoned. Then we tell them, Mara said. Her voice was calm, but her hands were clenched so tightly her knuckles had gone white. We test every site. We find every victim. We make sure everyone knows what was done to them. That's going to take years, Marcus said. Millions of dollars. Lawsuits that could drag on for decades. Then that's what we do. Mara looked at Thomas. You're giving us this with no strings attached? No strings. It's not mine to keep. It should have been handed over 50 years ago. He paused. There is one thing I'd like, though, not a condition, just a request, if you're willing. What? I'd like to help. I'm a teacher. I don't have legal expertise or scientific knowledge, but I can research, organize documents, interview people. I have summers off. I want to be part of fixing what my family broke. His eyes met Mara's. My Aunt Rita said courage doesn't expire. I'd like to prove that for myself. Mara looked at her mother. Catherine nodded slowly. Okay, Mara said. We'll figure out how you can help. Welcome to the fight, Mr. Kellen. Thomas, he said. Please, just call me Thomas. The new evidence cracked open cases that had been cold for decades. Within 6 months, the Foundation had filed lawsuits in 4 states on behalf of communities that had never known they had grounds to sue. Dr. Chen's team conducted water testing in all 14 sites mentioned in Howard Kellen's journals. 11 showed contamination above safe levels. The media coverage was intense. Grandfather's guilt, how one man's journals exposed decades of hidden contamination, ran as a headline in The Atlantic. Thomas Kellen Jr. gave interviews explaining why he'd come forward, becoming an unlikely advocate for accountability and intergenerational responsibility. But the most profound impact happened quietly, in small moments Mara collected like treasures. A woman in Kentucky who'd buried 3 children by age 40 finally understood why. The cancers weren't bad luck or God's will. They were poisoning deliberate and avoidable. She wept on the phone with Mara, rage and grief and relief all tangled together. I thought I was cursed, she said. I thought I'd done something wrong. But it wasn't me. It was them. It was them, Mara confirmed. And now we can prove it. A former worker from the Tennessee site called to say he kept samples of the water from 1968, stored in his basement in mason jars, never quite able to throw them away, because something told him they'd matter someday. Dr. Chen tested them. They matched the contamination signature from Howard Kellen's documentation perfectly. More evidence surfacing. More truth breaking through. And through it all, Thomas Kellen Jr. worked with fierce dedication, spending his summers in the Foundation office, organizing documents, researching property records, tracking down former workers who might have information. He was methodical and tireless, as if he could somehow work off his grandfather's karmic debt through sheer effort. One evening, Mara found him in the office long after everyone else had gone home, reading through his grandfather's journal with red-rimmed eyes. You should go home, she said gently. Get some rest. He knew, Thomas said without looking up. Every entry, he documented the harm. He knew children were dying. He knew water was poisoned. And he did it anyway because corporate told him to, because his pension depended on it, because speaking up would cost him his comfortable life. He finally looked at Mara. How do you live with that? How do you go home every night and kiss my grandmother and play with my father and just live normally? I don't know, Mara said honestly. My grandmother asked herself the same question about all the people who stayed silent. Maybe that's why she fought so hard, because she couldn't understand how others could know and do nothing. I'm not him, Thomas said quietly, as if trying to convince himself. I'm not my grandfather. No, you're not. You're the opposite of him. You're the correction. Mara sat down across from him. Thomas, you can't carry his guilt. It's not yours. What you can do is make sure his documentation served the purpose he never intended, justice for the people he helped harm. Thomas nodded slowly, closing the journal. Sometimes I want to hate him. And sometimes I wish I could ask him why he made those choices, whether he ever regretted it. He regretted it enough to keep evidence, Mara pointed out. That has to mean something. Maybe not redemption, but awareness, conscience, even if he couldn't act on it. Is that enough? I don't know, but it's what we have to work with. 2 years after Thomas brought his grandfather's journals to the Foundation, Mara stood on the site of what had been Consolidated Mining's largest Appalachian operation. The land was being transformed into a memorial park. Not a development, not a resort, but a place of remembrance. Plaques would bear the names of everyone who died from contamination-related illnesses. A museum would tell the story of what had happened here, how it had been covered up, and how truth had finally emerged. And at the center, a fountain would flow with clean water, tested daily, a symbol of what the land could become after healing. The dedication ceremony was small despite the media interest. Mara had insisted on that. This was for the victims and their families, not for cameras. Catherine stood beside her, holding a photograph of Iris Blackwell at age 35, strong and defiant, taken before everything had been stolen from her. They'd placed copies of that photo throughout the museum, along with excerpts from her journals, her testimony, her evidence. Thomas Kellen Jr. was there too, standing slightly apart from the crowd, as if unsure he had the right to be present. But Ellie Morrison saw him and walked over, taking his arm. "Come stand with us," she said firmly. "You're part of this healing too." When it was time for speeches, Mara approached the microphone with her grandmother's original journal in her hands. She'd read from it at dozens of events now, but it never got easier. The words still caught in her throat, still made her eyes burn. "My grandmother wrote this in October 1967, the night before they came to institutionalize her," Mara said, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. She wrote, "I know they'll call me crazy. I know they'll make me seem unreliable. But I want whoever finds this to know, I am not insane. I am not delusional. I am simply a woman who saw something wrong and couldn't stay silent. And if that makes me crazy in their eyes, then I'll wear that label proudly, because the alternative is complicity." She paused, letting the words settle. "My grandmother wore that label for 47 years. She died believing the world thought she was mentally ill, a troublemaker, someone whose testimony couldn't be trusted. But she was wrong about one thing. She wasn't forgotten. The truth she buried waited for someone to find it. And once found, it couldn't be buried again." The crowd was silent, listening. Mara saw people crying, including several elderly individuals who'd lived through the contamination era. This memorial exists because my grandmother refused to be silent, because Rita Kellen found courage at the end of her life, because Ellie Morrison kept her mother's diary for 56 years, because Thomas Kellen chose to expose his own grandfather's crimes rather than protect a family legacy built on lies. Mara's voice strengthened. Truth has no expiration date. Justice may be delayed, but it's never too late to fight for it. And silence is what they count on. Silence is how they win. She held up the journal. "So we won't be silent. Not anymore. Not ever again." The applause that followed was thunderous, cathartic. People stood, embracing each other, crying openly. Mara saw an elderly man in a wheelchair raise his fist in the air, tears streaming down his face. He'd worked in the mines in 1967, had tried to report contamination, had been fired and blacklisted for his trouble. After the ceremony, people approached Mara one by one. Some thanked her. Some shared their own stories of being silenced or dismissed. One woman, perhaps in her 80s, pressed a small metal box into Mara's hands. "My sister worked at Consolidated Mining in 1964, the woman said. She kept notes about strange barrels being dumped at night. She died in 1970, and I've had her notes ever since. I didn't know what to do with them. But now I do. Take them. Add them to the record." Mara accepted the box with shaking hands. "Thank you. Your sister's documentation will matter. I promise." "I know," the woman said simply, "because you made my promise matter. You made all of our stories matter." That night, Mara returned to her cabin on the mountain, exhausted but somehow lighter than she'd felt in years. The memorial had been dedicated. The stories had been told. The truth had been given its rightful place in history. The chickens greeted her with their usual chaos, demanding food and attention. Dolly was long gone now, but her great-great-granddaughters carried on her legacy of fierce watchfulness. Mara scattered feed and freshened their water, the familiar routine grounding her. Inside the cabin, she made tea and sat at her kitchen table, the same table where she'd first opened her grandmother's strongbox 5 years ago. So much had changed. The foundation had grown beyond her wildest hopes. Laws had been rewritten. Victims had found justice. Truth had prevailed, at least in this corner of the world. But the work wasn't finished. It would never be finished. There would always be new contamination to fight, new whistleblowers who needed protection, new communities who deserved clean water and honest answers. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Miss Blackwell, my name is Jennifer Torres. I work at a chemical plant in Louisiana. I've been seeing things that don't seem right. My supervisor told me to keep quiet, but I saw the documentary about your grandmother. I saw what happens when people stay silent. I have documentation. I need help. Please." Mara stared at the message for a long moment. Another Jennifer. Another person finding courage. Another fight beginning. She typed back, "Jennifer, you did the right thing by reaching out. You're not alone. Call this number tomorrow morning." She included the Foundation's main line. "We'll help you. I promise." The response came immediately. "Thank you. I've been so scared." But watching your grandmother's story, I realized being scared is okay. Being silent is not. "Exactly right," Mara wrote. "Your grandmother would be proud of you." "I hope so." She was a whistleblower, too. Got fired for it. Never got justice. Maybe this is for her, too. Mara felt tears prick her eyes. The cycle continuing. Grandmothers fighting. Granddaughters finishing the fight. Truth being passed down like an inheritance more valuable than gold. "It's for all of them," she wrote. "Every person who spoke up and paid the price. We're building a world where the price isn't so high." She set down her phone and opened her laptop. She'd draft talking points for Jennifer's case tonight. Send them to Marcus first thing in the morning. They'd schedule an intake interview, start gathering evidence, begin the process of protecting another truth-teller from retaliation. The work never ended. But that was okay. Mara had learned to find joy in the ongoing fight, peace in the incremental victories, purpose in the knowledge that every case they won made the next one slightly easier. She pulled out her grandmother's journal and turned to a page she'd marked years ago. "Some days, I wonder if anyone will ever care about what I tried to do. Some days, I'm sure I've wasted my life fighting a battle I can't win. But then I remember I didn't fight to win. I fought because the alternative was being complicit in poisoning children. I fought because someone had to. And whether I win or lose, whether anyone remembers my name or not, I can at least say I tried. I can say I stood up when staying silent would have been easier. That has to be enough. Because if it's not enough, then nothing is." "It was enough," Mara whispered to the worn pages. "Grandma, it was more than enough. You started something that will outlive both of us. You lit a fire that won't go out." Outside her window, the mountain stood dark against the star-filled sky. Widow's Peak rose like a sentinel, its contaminated soil slowly healing under careful remediation. In 20 years, maybe 30, that land would be clean again, safe for children to play on, ready for new growth. Healing took time. Justice took time. But both were possible if enough people refused to give up. Mara closed the journal and stood, stretching muscles sore from a long day. Tomorrow she'd start on Jennifer Torres's case. Tomorrow there would be new fights, new challenges, new truths demanding to be heard. But tonight, she'd rest. Tonight, she'd stand on her porch and breathe clean mountain air and know that her grandmother's sacrifice had mattered, that Rita Kellen's late courage had mattered, that Ellie Morrison's 56 years of waiting had mattered. All of it mattered. Every person who'd found the strength to speak up, every document that had survived to tell its story, every moment of choosing truth over comfort, It all wove together into something larger than any individual life. It became legacy. It became change. It became hope for the next person who would face the same choice: speak or stay silent. And because of Iris Blackwell, because of everyone who'd followed in her footsteps, that choice was becoming easier. Not easy, never easy, but possible in a way it hadn't been before. Mara stepped onto her porch. The night was cool and clear, the kind of mountain night that made you believe in things larger than yourself. She thought about her grandmother, young and scared, burying evidence in a barn floor and praying someone would find it. Someone found it. Mara said to the darkness, to the mountain, to whatever piece of her grandmother's spirit still lingered in this place. And we're not letting go. Not ever. A shooting star streaked across the sky, brief and brilliant. Mara smiled, choosing to believe it was an answer, a confirmation, a blessing from a grandmother she'd barely known but had come to love through words on yellowed pages. The chickens were silent in their roosts. The mountain breathed its ancient breath. And Mara stood watch, the latest guardian of truths that refused to stay buried, the latest fighter in a war that would continue long after she was gone. But that was okay, because she'd leave her own evidence, her own trail for whoever came next. She'd make sure the foundation survived her, that the protections they'd won stayed in place, that the path she'd helped clear stayed open for future whistleblowers. She'd do what her grandmother did: fight with everything she had, document everything she learned, and trust that someone in the future would care enough to continue the work. Truth, Mara had learned, was like water. You could dam it, divert it, try to contain it, but eventually it found its way through. Eventually, it flowed where it needed to go. And when it did, it washed everything clean. Mara took one last look at the mountain, then went inside to prepare for tomorrow's battles. The work was never done. But neither was she. Not yet. Not while there were still stories to tell, still truths to uncover, still people who needed someone to believe them when everyone else said they were crazy. Her grandmother had taught her that, and it was a lesson Mara would carry until her own story ended and someone else picked up where she left off. The fight continued. The truth endured. And somewhere in the earth that remembered everything, seeds of justice waited patiently to break to the soil and bloom.